Father Leo.
Hi, Anne.
Hi. It's nice to be back with you again today. We had a little chat a few weeks ago.
Yeah.
And now we are back today to talk about is the God you believe in really God?
Mm-hmm.
And so that really, there's a lot wrapped up in that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think today I'd really like to unpack that a bit with you.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so I was thinking a good place for us to start might be right back to the days when you were in the seminary.
Mm-hmm.
And if you could just share with me, back in those days, the God that you learned about in the seminary.
Yeah, I think the first thing I'd want to say to you, Anne, is the God I learned about, ideas about God, and all the rest of it. It was sort of came out of religion, because as you know, there was 4 years of theology, doctrine and dogma, canon law, liturgy, and it all carried with it a shaping of a God. And that's where it really got confirmed for me, because I brought a lot of that with me to the seminary out of my childhood. I remember as a kid, when we go to church on Sunday, the pastor would talk about pleasure seekers. Well, as a teenager, I loved pleasure. And I figured, this ain't good. And so I'd leave church figuring I was on the one road to hell. But the thing is, in a seminary, then of course with studying all this theology, it just reinforced it. This idea of a distant God, a God of requirements, a God who I came to believe loved me, but conditionally. The big thing was be good. In other words, don't think, don't talk, just believe. Believe in the theology. But you see, Anne, there's a big difference between theology and God. They're not the same thing. And so the shaping of God was primarily coming out of traditional religion.
Mm-hmm.
And traditional religion carried that God of the punitive God, a God who judges, a God who would send people to hell, and was really not involved in people's lives at all. And so when I look back now, I have to say to you, Anna, it was not a very attractive God. Even, but you know, you're in the system, so what are you going to do? You know, you got a job. Right. You're a priest. You got to tell the people,
right,
children of God. And of course, when I came out then, and I was in the front of the church looking out and saw all those people, well, they were children of God, but they were sinners.
right.
They were sinners. They were born in sin, original sin. St. Augustine came up with that idea, although it has some roots in St. Paul, but he really brought it in there. And when he brought in the idea of original sin, then eventually the whole idea of atonement, that God needed a sacrifice in order to reestablish a relationship to humankind. And so, in many ways, religion became very legalistic, very egoistic. The thing was to believe the right thing. That was the big thing, and was believe the right thing, and not necessarily do the right thing, but believe the right thing, and go to Mass on Sunday, and if you did that, then you were a good Christian, you know, and so it was no, I'm not saying that religion didn't help people during life. I know it did. But on the other hand, we become like the God we worship, so we became a very punitive society, you know, and still is a very punitive society, that when people make mistakes, they needed to be punished. And if you're punished enough, you'll straighten up and fly right. But as far as love is concerned, and to act with love, and that's a big thing that
So, Leo, you also have a master's degree in psychological counseling. So, I know as a child, I was very much formed in that way also. I think my vision of, or it seemed when I was a very young child, that God was a bit of a celestial spy agency,
Yeah.
that there was a book up there and there was someone someone taking notes.
That's right.
And so I think as a child I was always a bit fearful.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you think that impacts people going forward? How does that impact their psychology?
Well, I think very much because fear binds you and enslaves you.
Mm.
And St. Paul, even in his writings, he talked about being enslaved and being set free.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, and like yourself, I was afraid of God. Afraid of God and always afraid that I was going to say or do the wrong thing. And I found when I come out and started ministry, that's what I found, people that are so afraid of God. And at the end of their life, they'd be so terrified that they're going to meet this God and that they weren't going to pass their final exam,
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And it was, and the guilt, a lot of guilt because being good, I think, Anne, the first time I was over at St. Al's, and I preached the sermon that being good had nothing to do with being a Christian. Now, I said that deliberately, almost like just to get people's attention. But that wasn't what it was. That's because to be a good, it was idealizing. And when we have an ideal, psychology will tell us there's always a gap between the ideal and me. And that's the place where you get the guilt and the fear. You can never measure up.
No.
You can be as good as you like,
Mm-hmm.
but then the bar just gets higher. You can never be good. And even when they came to Jesus and said, "Good master," he put his hands up and said, "Hold it, boys. Don't call me good. Only God is good."
Mm.
So, I remembered that, and that I think helped me a lot to get away from this be good stuff.
So how many years into your priesthood would you say that things started to shift for you, where you thought, okay, I need to relook at this. I need to think about this in another way. I need to deliver the message to the people that are sitting out there, hungry for a message.
Yeah. I don't think it was very shortly after my ordination, now, because I'll tell you why. I passed all the exams.
Mm-hmm.
I got good marks,
Mm-hmm.
and I had a whole lot of answers. And after about 6 months after I'd been out, nobody ever asked me the questions. But they were asking questions that I didn't have any answer for.
Right.
And eventually that process created an awareness of me that they really weren't interested in the answers.
Mm.
They had other questions for which I did not have an answer. And that's when I started to...
Can you give me an example of... Can you give me an example of a question that you had to stop and think, I don't have an answer for that?
Well, I think the biggest hit was with suffering.
Yes. Right.
People were suffering, sick, breaking their legs, losing their jobs, all kinds of suffering. And where is God? If God loves me, is God punishing me?
Mm-hmm.
So by that time I got away from, well, if God loves people, he's not going to punish them. So a lot of stuff like that started me down a road. I realized that somehow religion was going down the wrong road. It just hit me, And of course, as you know, Anne, I've been an avid reader. And so reading some of the theology, but I think the biggest thing that helped me, Anne, was reading the psychology books.
Yes.
Because they showed another way of looking at life, a different world view.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's what really was the hinge in the door for me, was to be able to see that there's another world view than the one I've been introduced to. And I wanted to explore that new world view so that I could see it more clearly. And by seeing it more clearly, and present to people a message of hope and a message of a sense that they were sinners. You know, when I was baptizing a little baby, and look at that beautiful little baby, and to think he's supposed to have original sin on his soul, but she's a beautiful child. Like, wait a minute, it doesn't add up. So to start questioning, because you know, a religion, when you and I were young, didn't allow for questioning.
Right.
No, you swallowed a hook, line, and sinker. And so this is where I realized that the traditional God really wasn't working for me, and for a lot of educated people particularly, the traditional God wasn't working for them either. It just wasn't.
So, Leo, when you started preaching about God as love, God not as a punitive God, but a God of love, did you notice a change in people, in the questions they were asking?
Yes, but you know, it's a fantastic thing. Right after, I think first of all I had to do it myself. I had to make my own inner journey of conversion to a God who dwells within me and all around me and within all of creation. So I had to take the incarnation seriously. It wasn't just Jesus. We're all born. In God we live and move and have our being. That the incarnation is all of us, all of the people of the world, not just Christians. That God is incarnate in all of creation. So I had to get that inside myself first, and then I could talk about it, and talk about the incarnation with a better understanding of it, and realizing that you talk about the incarnation, then you automatically find yourself going down a different road. Theologically, spiritually, you're going down a different road.
Can you expand on that a little bit?
Well, the different road is, Anne, that first of all, incarnation, then it means that you, I, the people of the world, where God become human. We are the body of God. Sally McFay wrote her book, Creation, the Body of God. All of creation is the body of God. And that changes everything, because if everything is the body of God, then everything, everybody, and everyone is sacred. It changes my attitude of how I look at people. But it also helps me, it's not what I see, it's how I see, and the Bible talks about new eyes. The new eyes. Those two little ones up here. No, the eyes of my heart. And to see everything as one. And God is there. And as I say to people today, maybe you believe in God, maybe you don't. But can you see God? That's more important, you know. And if you...
does that perplex them? Does that perplex them?
It does.
That question?
It does, indeed. But if you didn't have a body, I'd have a hard time seeing you today. And so, too, with God. You've got a body, I can see you. God has a body, all of creation. I can see God anywhere and everywhere. And so, it changed that whole idea for me to know that I live in God, and God lives in me. And that's who my God is. And the God of unconditional love. The God who really, in a sense, doesn't even notice my mistakes. Doesn't even notice my mistakes. We no longer call people sinners. We call people God's beloved. And therefore, like if a person is a sinner, then you rob them of their self-esteem. But if you remind people, look, you're beloved and you're loved. Love yourself. It's all about loving yourself and loving all of creation. And so it's a whole new freedom that we bring to you. And we don't see you as children anymore. We see you as adults who can think for yourself. And so we encourage people be seekers and searchers and,
Mm-hmm.
and discover the God who dwells all around us, but especially the God who dwells within me.
Mm-hmm.
The God, yeah.
Do you
Scriptures.
find that people still struggle with that?
Oh,
They
yeah.
can't, yeah.
It's really due to, it's really to change their mind
Mm-hmm.
from the God up there, the sky God I call him,
Mm-hmm.
to the God who dwells within us
Mm-hmm.
and within animals, within the trees, in the grass, in the water, in the earth. And we call the earth Mother Earth because she's a birther. So it changes our whole view of everything.
Mm-hmm.
And the biggest thing it does, and the one is we're all interconnected. Because if that's the body, if all creation is a body, then just as our arms and hands are connected, so we're connected with all of creation. We're interconnected with them and interrelated with them. And St. Francis called them brother moon and sister sun.
Mm-hmm.
And he called all the animals by sisters or brothers or whatever, because he saw them as relatives.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, it would have to do a lot with animals. We generally don't kill relatives. So we don't go around killing animals for a trophy. We can't do it
Mm-hmm.
because it changes it. And so it really changes how we relate to everybody. The idea of inclusivity, because before that we had our tribal God, eh? You had the Catholic God, you had the Presbyterian God, the Anglican God, the Jewish God, and all the rest of them. But it gets us away from that tribal mentality, where the universal, you know, the all to one. And you know, the people in China or Japan or whatever, they're all my brothers and sisters.
Mm-hmm. It makes me think of children, small children. I
Yeah.
can get it. My sister, when her children were very, very young, I don't know, maybe 4 and 6, they were out for a hike. And the 6-year-old said, "Mom, where is God?" And so my sister paused, and before she could answer, the little 4-year-old said, "I don't know, but I think I heard God yesterday."
Yeah.
And I thought, isn't that beautiful?
Yeah.
I think I heard God yesterday.
Yeah. But I think what happened, Anne, with the traditional religion was that the children ought to knew intuitively of God's presence. But we schooled them out of it
Mm.
by telling them that it was up in the sky. We schooled them out of it. So in a sense, because of that, a lot of adults today have kind of got to go back and re-examine and reflect on that and see, how do I get back to where I was at one time? And I know I had to do that, Anne. You asked, when did that start? Well, you know, I had to start where I realized that the God of the traditional religion wasn't working for people. And so make that journey backwards in your heart, within yourself. And then when you recognize that you grow and you're transformed, not being good, but to grow and be transformed, then you've got something to offer to people. That's life-giving.
Mm-hmm.
That's really life-giving. And I don't know about you, but like, I was really not attractive to God that I was presented with as a child. Like you, I was afraid of God.
Mm-hmm.
Afraid of God. I'm not afraid of God anymore.
Right.
I know I don't have to worry about a thing.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have to worry about a thing. I don't have any worries that God's going to judge me or punish me or nothing. I have no worries about that. Don't even, no.
Lovely.
It's, God loves me unconditionally, and that's just the way God is, and that's the God I'm attached to. It's the God I see all around me. Good enough for me.
Mm-hmm. So, Leo, you talked about that we become the God we worship.
Yeah.
Or your image of God creates you.
Yeah.
And so if, let's say, I'll use myself as an example, if I didn't worry about this celestial spy agency or
Yeah.
someone taking notes on me, if I, from a young age, believed that God was love, that God was a loving,
Right. Yeah.
loving God, and I was loved, and that I was good.
Yeah.
If everyone was able to have that, what kind of a world how do you think the world would change?
Well, one would happen if you mentioned at the beginning. I'm a psychotherapist. First of all, I'd lose a lot of clients, and so would a lot of other therapists.
Mm,
You know, because people are growing up with conditional love. You know, and they hear things like, "When you do that, you're a bad kid. When you do that." Ooh, or they're always coming up short in some way with parents, teachers, or whatever, and so the loss of self-esteem, I think that's a bigger thing, and of course the world at large. If people really were introduced to the God of the universe, the God that Jesus revealed, a God is with us. God is with us. I often say, Anne, one of the most important words in the Bible is with. It's with. God is with. God is with us. There's nowhere you can go where God isn't there. Nowhere. That's number one. Secondly, God is for us. God's on our side. It may not always seem like it when somebody comes down with cancer or they lose their job or whatever. It may not seem like that, but God is with us and God is for us. And we can turn to God in our struggles and our difficulties. God is for me. And thirdly, God is up ahead of me. God is leading me. God is guiding me into my own growth and transformation. God is leading me into the more, always the more. And so those are the three things I see about the God I see. Is God is for me, He's with me, and God leads me into the future, and whatever that might be. But I think having that sense that God is with me and that God is for me, He's on my side, and she is there to help me to live this life fully. So that means a lot to me. That really does, you know.
And I suppose in your counseling, many people have left or turned back on the punitive God. They struggle with that, and so how do they access that loving God? How do they get to a different place? How do they get to feeling about God in a different way?
I think, Anne, and this is where you get wise in your old age. I think today, if that came about, I would take them for a walk in the snow. If it was in the spring, I'd take them out and have them look at the grass, hear the birds.
I guess that's like my little niece saying, I think I heard God yesterday.
Yeah, like take them out. We call creation God's first catechism. Creation, not the booklet. Well, I had a catechism. You had a curriculum, probably. Yeah, I had a catechism, same thing. But no, I would start with our first catechism, which is nature, and have people look at it and hear it and see it, and then what do you see, and try to get them to open their eyes so they would see God, and then come to believe, if you will. But I would no longer try to put it into people's heads from doctrine or dogma. No. I would, and if they're an adult, get them involved in situations where they'd be giving of themselves and loving other people, getting involved with people who are different. Experience. We're talking today about experiential religion. Experiential religion. And that's why it's kind of the new in thing, is to get people to draw close to nature, to Mother Earth, and let Earth teach us, and teach us to see Because if I see, then I'll see God, and I suppose maybe I'll believe. I don't know. Doesn't matter. I know that my relationship, because the God of the news story, which is science and faith, is a God. That's a God of inclusion, you know, and that's the big thing. It's through experiences and reflecting on our experiences that we open up our eyes to see the more, and so that's a good question, Anne. But I think that's what I would do now. You know, if I was a teacher in a Catholic school, on religion class, I would be taking the kids outside. Take them outside. What do you see? What do you see? What are you learning? See what they say.
Is there one book that you would recommend if there was someone that was just wanting to know a little bit more about a living God? Is there a particular book that you might recommend?
Well, there's so many. Elizabeth Johnson is a woman, a tremendous writer. Several Americans, a lot of the writers today are either European. Henry Nouwen, he's dead. What I'm thinking of, Omerku. And what a lot of those people have done, they've combined science and religion. Because with the traditional religion, it's built on a three-tier universe. You know, God's up here. I think they have the clergy in here, don't we? You're at the bottom. You know, it's all top-down religion. Whereas seeing the world as organic, and that we're part of that living organism, and that living organism is all one, and being able to see that really shapes the way that we're going to live, you know. Yeah. So I think any one particular book, I think any of those by the people who are really combining science and faith. Because traditional religion, which leaves out science and is still working out of that three-tier universe image, like it's over with. It's, you know, it's not three-tier. You know it isn't. There's no flat earth, you know. And so I got a whole library here behind me, and
You do.
all kinds of them there.
Yes.
And but I certainly think that, and when
Ronald Rolheiser, Richard Rohr.
Rolheiser,
All beautiful
Omerku,
writers.
yeah, and Richard Rohr. There's a lot of really excellent writers today, you know. And it's not that they're going to give you a bunch of patsy answers, but what they're going to do is challenge you to think for yourself. To think for yourself. And as you know, traditional religion discourages you from thinking for yourself. You know, he used to say when you go to church, you'd park twice. Park your car in the parking lot and park your brains in the vestibule. And then go into the church. And the priest would tell you what to think and what to do, right? Or what not to do. Yeah. So that was quite a difference. And today, you know, Anne, with us here in North America anyway, like you and people, it's the first generation of Christians who are educated. Either they've gone to college or university, or they listen to television, or they read the paper, or they read books. People are educated today, and they are thinking for themselves. And
Certainly starting to question.
yeah, starting to question, and we have good news, Anne, to preach and teach about this God who's with us, who's for us, leads us as ahead of us, and that loves us unconditionally, knows us and calls us by name. Like, we have so much good news, but somehow we get off the right road way back there. And I think in many places, especially with some of those new authors, they're calling us back to see differently, you know. And we're not surprised, because if you look at Jesus, his biggest trouble was with the religious authorities. That's the people that he called whited sepulchres, dead men bones, hypocrites, because their traditional God was giving them a very nice lifestyle while they oppressed the people.
Mm.
And they justified that because, you know, and so...
It sounds like a whole other interview.
Interview, yeah. I guess, yeah. Anyway, Ann, I think that's about it for today, I guess.
Well, it's interesting, Leo. The last time we had a conversation, taped conversation, and this conversation, you've left me with the same thing, that God is love.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So thank you.
Well, thank you, Ann. Thank you
We'll
very
chat
much.
again.
Yes, well done. You did great.